Well, good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much for coming in to what always, to me, is the highlight of the Compassion in World Farming calendar. My name is Philip Limbury. I'm the Chief Executive of Compassion in World Farming, and welcome to the 2024 Peter Roberts Memorial Lecture. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to say a few words about Peter Roberts. Who was he? Well, he was one half of an extraordinary duo. He was a dairy farmer in Hampshire in the 1960s, and he met a lady called Anna. They had a whirlwind romance, quickly became married, and then were together life partners with a vision. On the farm, on Peter's farm, what became their farm, a dairy farm, they became increasingly concerned and aware of the rise of factory farming, keeping animals confined indoors in cages so small they can't stretch their wings, and pigs kept where they can't turn around, and cows, dairy cows, kept indoors where they can't go outside. To Peter and Anna, that was totally anathema. That was no way to treat living, breathing, sentient creatures. Their hens, too, were free-ranging. The moment came when, during the 60s, a man from the ministry, MAF as it was called then, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, you'll know it now as DEFRA, a man from the ministry knocked on the door. He was one of an army of people that had fanned out across the countryside to preach the new way of industrial farming. He knocked on Peter's door and said, look, if you want to make a go of this farm, you've got to get those chickens and put them in a big broiler shed. A big broiler factory farm shed. That is the way to make money. Peter went home to Anna that night and told her, and she was horrified. And her immediate reaction is, Peter, that's no way to keep chickens. You can do what you like, but I'm having nothing to do with it. Peter, of course, was already totally opposed. He just didn't want to wait the game. So there and then, they both decided that was it. They were ending their farming days. They were going to start a charity, Compassion in World Farming, to fight the rise of factory farming. They had an extraordinary vision together. They could see how things connected, how treating animals cruelly also was a way of farming that did immense harm to the environment. But more than that, it does immense harm to all of us. And he once said that the thing which will bring down factory farming is the weight of disease. He saw the health implications. And so, knowing that, and having worked with Peter and Anna, and understanding their interconnectivity of vision, and knowing how they felt about animals, but also their health impacts, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce our speaker this year, who knows more than most of the health implications. Our speaker today is Dr. Amir Khan. He is a GP. He is also a television personality, the resident doctor, I understand, on Good Morning Britain. His specialism is type 2 diabetes as a GP. Outside of that specialism, he's a keen runner, a keen gardener, a keen baker and traveller. He's also not content with looking after people brilliantly as a doctor, he is also the Vice President of the Butterfly Conservation Society, the Vice President of the Wildlife Trusts, and the President of the RSPB. What an amazing portfolio.
I feel like I'm just collecting those now.
And more than that, what is quite remarkable about today's speaker is that I always try to be the best dressed person on any stage. But today I am upstaged. Please, a big warm welcome, Dr Amir Khan.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Thank you. I've got to explain why I'm in a tux, because it is weird, isn't it? I don't normally kind of just hang out in a tuxedo, even if I'm coming to Oxford, which is posh for me because I'm from up north. But I'm hosting a ball this evening for Leeds Hospital Charity. So once I'm done here, I'm going to hot-foot it back up to Leeds and host this ball, and it's to raise money for a new transplant unit at the hospital. So if I do have to dash after this, I am sorry, but it is for a good cause. But thank you for having me. I'm really, really pleased to be here and honoured to be in such an iconic venue. And I want to talk about, just expand on what Phil said there, really, about the perils of factory farming when it comes to health. As a doctor, I'm really interested in food and health. The two of them are so intricately linked. And with the work I do around type 2 diabetes, a big part of that is nutrition, and how nutrition not just affects our blood sugars and our insulin levels, but our health in general when it comes to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, cancers, and general inflammation around the body, which is a hot topic at the moment. And I think, you know, what often gets discussed in this arena is specific types of food and how they can impact our bodies. But what isn't looked at is this kind of more macro view on things, on how we produce that food and whether we can do better for ourselves and for the animals. Because I think inherently human beings are very selfish, and we won't change our behavior unless it affects us directly. And mass production of meat and factory farming is affecting us already. It's not something that we need to wait to see whether it will. It already is in a number of ways, which I'm going to discuss. But it's important to understand what factory farming or this kind of mass production of meat is, and why that has an impact on our health. It's intensive agriculture. And it's designed to maximize production whilst minimizing cost. And to do that, they have to keep cattle, poultry, fish in high density, small areas using technology. And the focus is often on, well, almost exclusively on sale and trade. And when profit is the driving force behind anything, the well-being of everyone involved can fall by the wayside. And that is reflective of most industries. And yes, absolutely, the animals' welfare are often discarded when it comes to factory farming. But our welfare as consumers isn't the priority of the people who are mass producing this food. Our health isn't the priority. Consumption is, and getting us eating this food, maybe making us feel full for a short period of time and then going back for more, because that is all behind what's driving this industry, profit and sales. But our well-being isn't really high up on the agenda when it comes to factory farming. And so it's really important that we look at what the future holds and how that is going to impact us as individuals, as it already is right now. And I think I've got to say I'm a vegetarian. I'm not completely plant-based. I do eat dairy, but I am vegetarian, and so I have a slightly kind of biased view on this. But you know, we know that the more plants you include in your diet, in general, the healthier you can be. It's more complex than just the food you eat. It's how much sleep you get and how much you move and your social economic status. There's so many factors that drive health. But nutrition, and particularly plant-based nutrition, is a big driver of that. That's not to say that eating meat isn't good for you, but it does depend on the type of meat. Good quality fish, lean chicken does have health benefits when it comes to protein, though you can get protein from many plant sources, and certain vitamins as well. However, you've got to balance that against whether that is ethically sourced meat produce. And I think when you are vegetarian, perhaps, or if you've got animal interests at heart, we can often live in a bubble and surround ourselves with people who feel the same way. And you can get into this, and I certainly did, I got into this false kind of sense of security where I thought, oh, actually, it feels like less people are eating meat. It feels like we are moving towards more plant-based eating. And just like any algorithm on social media, the more you kind of consume that bit of information, the more it gives you, and the more it reinforces that belief. But actually, projections show, and this is according to the World Animal Protection's latest report, that actually meat consumption is going to skyrocket in the next 10 years or so. So by 2030, meat consumption is projected to grow 30% in Africa, 18% in the Asia-Pacific area, 12% in South America, 9% in North America, and 0.4% in Europe. So we live in Europe, and so it may feel, again, that isn't happening, but it is happening. And so how are we going to keep up with this demand of meat consumption? And then it will go back to more confined and cramped spaces for these animals. And that's bad for them, but it's equally bad for us. And I want to look at how that affects our health. So there's this kind of juxtaposition. The first thing I'm going to talk about is both malnutrition and obesity. So factory farming contributes to both of those things. Malnutrition in the sense that actually large quantities of land are taken up to grow crops to feed animals. And that land is therefore not available for growth of food for human consumption. And that may not affect us in more wealthy countries, but certainly that is already starting to affect people in countries in Africa, in parts of Asia, and Indonesia. And what we're seeing there is increasing amounts of malnutrition as a result of food scarcity due to factory farming, which sounds weird, but it's true. At the same time, we're getting high volumes of cheaper produced meat from these factory farms, which is leading to excess meat consumption. And we're all affected by a cost of living crisis to a degree. The world is affected by it in a number of ways. And when you are short of cash, and I work in inner city Bradford, it's socially deprived. There's lots of families that I look after who don't have very much money and don't have very many resources. And so when they do eat meat, they often buy the cheapest cut of meat that they can, and that's understandable. They're under a lot of pressure. Ethics of meat is not high on their agenda. Their agenda is about feeding their family and themselves and getting themselves full so they can be productive. But what that is leading to is an increased intake of processed meat, and that is particularly bad for our health. So processed meat is any meat that's been changed from its natural kind of form. So it could be salting, smoking, drying, or canned meat. All of that counts as processed meat. And we all know the kind of meats: the sausages, the salamis, cured ham, smoked meats. People often kind of are a bit surprised when they find out that smoked salmon is processed meat, but it is processed meat, and it can be bad for us. Now, food is a bit of a touchy subject when we say good food and bad food, because it's not that simple. For a lot of people, like I say, it's about eating food and keeping families full, and that can, cause all sorts of pressure on them. But we know that there are foods when eaten in high quantities, not part of a balanced diet, that does have an adverse effect on their health. Now, it's important to say a lot of the studies in humans, when it comes to looking at the effects of processed meat or red meat and illness, is observational studies. And what that means is that there is a link of an increased risk of certain diseases or illnesses which go back to higher consumptions of processed meat, but there isn't a direct cause found, because those kind of studies are not very ethical. We can't put someone on a very high processed meat diet to see if they get cancer. That isn't very ethical. So, but what we can do is look backwards and see those people who got certain illnesses, what were their diets like before. And I know this sounds a bit weird given the scenario, but there are animal studies that do show a direct cause between certain meat consumption and certain illnesses, particularly in rats. So if we look at processed meats in general, there's a number of them. And there's a number of compounds that affect our health when it comes to processed meats. Just bear with me 1 second. I've written these notes. I've been, when you've got it's all a bit of a anyway. Right. So there's a compound in processed meats like bacon and sausages called nitrosamine. It's a type of nitrite. Now, not all nitrites are bad for us. In fact, some nitrites are found in vegetables and they can be quite healthy for us. But when you cook processed meats, for example, if you fry bacon or if you grill sausages, that can lead to a potentially harmful substance called nitrosamine being formed by that cooking process. And there is an observational link between nitrosamine, which is released from the cooking process of processed meats, and stomach and bowel cancer. There's also quite a strong link between red meat consumption more than twice a week and bowel cancer. And when you look at the bowel cancer website, the official bowel cancer website, they make that very strong link there, and it's one of the few things they really recommend when it comes to reducing your risk of bowel cancer if you've got a family history of bowel cancer. Now, I mentioned smoked meat as well, and smoking meat is one of the oldest ways to kind of keep meat and keep it from going bad, essentially. But when you smoke meat, whether you use wood or coal or any kind of organic compound to smoke the meat, it can release something called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And these can collect on the surface of meats. And that, again, has been linked to certain cancers, including breast cancer, stomach cancer, and bowel cancer. So it's really important that we have a think about whether in this world of increasing rates of cancers, how much our food, and there's a lot you can't do without getting cancer, but how much our food is contributing to our risk of developing cancer. People often link cholesterol, high cholesterol, and meat consumption. Now, that's up for debate. Most of our cholesterol is formed by our own bodies, and it's genetic. The vast majority of our cholesterol is. But diet does play a part in it, and animal fats, particularly around dairy, can contribute to it. Whereas plant fats, those kind of monounsaturated fats that are found in things like avocados and olive oils, compete for cholesterol in our body. It can actively reduce our cholesterol. So when I am talking to my patients around how they can actively reduce their cholesterol, there's a lot they can't do because, like I say, a lot of it is genetic or just their own bodies. But eating more plant fats does actively reduce cholesterol levels. The other big thing that is really going to be a problem in the coming decades when it comes to factory farming and our health is the emergence of superbugs. We've seen it already. When it comes to factory farming, 75% of the world's antibiotics, 75% of the world's antibiotics are used in factory farming. That's an incredible amount of medicine used to prevent illness, promote growth in some cases of animals, and to treat illness as well. But all of that use of antibiotics has already led to the emergence of superbugs. And it's estimated right now that 1.27 million people die globally from the emergence of superbugs, and because of superbugs. And by 2050, the superbug epidemic, pandemic, whatever you might call it, is predicted to be the leading cause of death globally. So unless we do something about this use of antibiotics in animal farming, in factory farming in particular, we are really facing an Armageddon when it comes to medicine. And that is one thing that really bothers me, because we're so strict when it comes to prescribing antibiotics as GPs, and we only really give them out when it's absolutely necessary. But then to hear that this is going on in this whole other industry, and sometimes we get blamed for prescribing too many antibiotics, but this whole industry gets ignored. I think it's really important for us to look at that and see how that's going to affect us. And it's not just the emergence of superbugs, it's the transmittance of illnesses as well. We know zoonotic diseases exist, illnesses that can be transmitted between animals and humans. The more we cage animals up, the more they live in squalor, the more likely they are to pass these bugs amongst themselves. A mutation can and will take place. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when, which may well then lead to a new bug being formed that can be transmitted to humans. And we've already seen that in swine flu and bird flu, animal to human transmission. So I think it's a really scary place when it comes to infectious diseases and factory farming, and it's something that certainly over the next 20 or 30 years is going to be a real hot topic about it. One thing that my patients often ask, and I just thought I would bring it here, is fish and how healthy fish can be to health. And there's no doubt about it. We recommend, from a health point of view, if you're not plant-based, that eating 2 portions of oily fish or fatty fish a week is good for your health because of the omega-3 content. It can reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. It's been linked to reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease as well. I've got to say, once I did say to a patient of mine, if you eat fatty fish twice a week, it will benefit your health. And he went, oh, I go down to the chippy every Friday. And I was like, no, not that kind of fatty fish. I'm talking about salmon and mackerel. But farmed salmon it's just not good for them, and it's not good for us. They are still relatively high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are the good fatty acids that we want. But wild salmon, if you are choosing to eat fish, wild salmon has far higher quantities of omega-3. But what farmed salmon does have in high quantities is something called omega-6 fatty acids, which has been linked to increased inflammation within our body. In fact, it's got about 6 times more omega-6 fatty acids than wild salmon. And you might think, well, what will inflammation do to me in my body? Well, what we know it does is, so essentially what inflammation is on a kind of biochemical level is you've got something, this food can release something called free radicals. These are atoms without certain electrons in them, so they're not complete atoms, and they travel around the body looking to be complete. It's like they're looking for this extra electron to stabilize themselves and complete, and in doing so, they can damage our DNA. Vegetables, plant-based food are really high in antioxidants, which neutralize these free radicals, but meat isn't, and fish isn't. And so they can do damage to our DNA, which can increase our risk of cancer, but increased inflammation puts our immune system on standby because it thinks something is going on in our body. And what that can increase your risk of are something called autoimmune diseases, where your own immune system switches on because it might be fighting off an infection of some sort, but then it doesn't switch off and it starts to attack healthy parts of your body. And Diseases that are classed as autoimmune include rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, there's psoriasis, there's a huge list of autoimmune conditions, and increased inflammation has been linked to these autoimmune diseases. And the other thing about farmed salmon, which many of you will know, is that wild salmon eat krill and shrimp and crustaceans, which give them that natural pink colour, whereas farmed salmon aren't fed any of those things generally. They're fed soy and corn, and they are naturally a grey colour, which is very unappealing to a consumer. You don't want to buy grey salmon, do you? Most people cut the grey bits off. And so to make them pink, they feed them certain synthetic substances, which are actually banned in human consumption, but okay for salmon to eat, and then okay for them to find themselves in the food chain for us to eat. And that can't be good for us. That's what makes them pink. It's not natural for farmed salmon. I'm just going to touch on the environmental contamination side of things as well, because I think it's a hot topic in terms of the state of our rivers right now. But factory farming produces large amounts of animal waste, and that's not just the stuff that runs off into the land and the rivers, but it's the 400 plus gases that factory farming gives off, including methane and carbon dioxide. And that has dreadful effects on the environment, but also on our health. And there's links with some of the waste product that comes from factory farming containing heavy metals like zinc and arsenic even. And that can get into ecosystems, and that can cause problems for the people who live around those areas, particularly in more developing countries. And I guess the other thing to think about when it comes to health and factory farming is the health of the workers in that industry. It's a very manual job. There's lots of musculoskeletal issues that can go along with moving animals, being on your feet all day. But there's a psychosocial aspect and psychological impact of seeing animals treated in this way all the time. And you might think, well, get another job. But for some people, for a lot of people, it's not that easy. And that might be the only job that they can get in that area, particularly when you're looking at it at a global level. And so we've got to really look at it from all aspects. From a health point of view, moving away from factory farming is really the best thing for all of us. The difficult thing is the answers, isn't it? Phil is really well versed in the answers, and there's a number of different potential solutions, and these answers may lead to lower yields, but far more nutrient-dense foods. And it's going back to the more traditional ways of farming, but also embracing technology. It's kind of both of those things. So, looking at the soil, how we nourish the soil better, looking at natural cycles of crop growth, varying crop growth, so you don't get this kind of monochromal kind of side of plants, which is completely a dead zone for biodiversity. Rotating crops, introducing older crops that we used to grow, more things like legumes, which introduce more nitrogen into the soil. All of that is part of the answer. Urban farming is another part of it, and looking at how we can incorporate more urban areas into the farming industry, so we can leave more space for biodiversity. Cultivated meat is another interesting idea that's coming out, and we're looking at ways to grow lab-based meat, and that could be better for the environment. AI is a really interesting aspect of this as well, and using technology. There's all sorts of different technology out there that looks at soil quality, and looking at what's needed in that soil, how much water plants need, so they're not just watered on a kind of time scale, they're watered based on the technology telling us how much water that plant needs, so there's not a lot of water wastage. And going plant-based as well or consuming more plants is going to be better for us in our health. I've talked about the antioxidants, I've talked about cholesterol. It reduces risk of cancer, it can help fight the obesity epidemic. There's so many benefits to eating more plants every week. And again, when I talk to my patients and I say, there's all sorts of arbitrary numbers out there, you should be eating 5 portions of fruit and veg a day or 30 plants a week. And that is sometimes off-putting to a lot of people because those targets are really hard for some people to reach, and they'll just go, well, forget it, I don't want to do it, I'm just going to stick to whatever I'm doing because I can't hit those targets. What I would definitely say as a doctor is anything is better than nothing. So rather than trying to hit targets when it comes to the number of plants per week or per day, just try your best to do what you can. And that will be better for you rather than giving up completely. And that's true for food, but it's also true for number of hours of sleep. We say 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night. That's unobtainable for lots of people. Whatever you can get, as much as you can get, that's good enough. Same with movement, 30 minutes of movement or exercise a week, that might be unobtainable or not achievable for people. Whatever you can do. So whatever we can all do when it comes to eating more plants, and the targets, don't aim for the targets, aim for what you can do best. That will be best for your health. Thank you. Is that all right?
Perfect. Please. Dr. Amir, thank you so much for a wonderful lecture, really spelling out the health aspects around factory farming, around the need for more balanced diets, more healthy diets. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to have a quick conversation up here before throwing it open to you for some questions from the floor. So do get your questions up ready. The one that I want to ask is that you've got such clarity around the health implications of factory farming and meat. Why aren't more doctors talking about it?
It's not taught in medical school. We don't have a module on nutrition when it comes to medicine. The 5 or 6 years you spend at university, there's so much to learn, and we often leave this stuff to the experts who are the dietitians. The reason, I'm interested in it from an animal welfare point of view, but also as my role as someone who manages lots of people living with type 2 diabetes, food and the impact of food on health is a big part of that. And I often say to my patients, when I'm talking to them, and when I do a specialist clinic like type 2 diabetes, I have a bit more time, because normally I have 10 minutes per appointment in my GP clinic, which is like ridiculous. But with my patients living with type 2 diabetes, I have 20 minutes, which is a luxury. And so I can really unpick some of their food habits and pull back and look at why that particular person's diet has affected them in such ways. And factory farming and diet, food that isn't balanced, I think, is, you've got to be so careful when you're describing people's diets, because you can't say poor diet anymore, because it's not that easy. It's not for people who are struggling. Food is food, and they've just got to eat. But that leads to disease and illness, both mental and physical, and so they're in a really precarious situation. But it's the reason why more doctors aren't talking about it is because it's just not taught in the way that it should be. In the NHS itself, we're constantly firefighting. Where we would love to do more preventative stuff. We would love to, and all of this is preventative. But because the NHS is in such a state, we're constantly firefighting, and we can't get to the stuff that would really make this preventative difference.
Yeah, I realise it's a big tanker to turn around, but what would be your first pointers to trying to set a new direction to recalibrate?
I would focus on eating more plants. I think that has a benefit both from the factory farming side of things and from a health point of view. And it doesn't mean you have to go plant-based, because again, that sounds like, even for me, I am not plant-based, I am vegetarian. I would love to be vegan, and I hope to be vegan one day. But if you saw my mum's reaction when I told her I was vegetarian, if I tell her I'm vegan. I don't live with my mum, I want to make that clear. But she cooks a lot of our meals, and yeah. But I think we've got to get more people to understand that plants are so nourishing, but so filling and not boring. So many people think plants themselves are just like a side dish and they're not the main event. But plants are the main event. They're so diverse, so tasty, so many nutrients. And there's lots of misinformation out there around plant-based diets being lacking in nutrients. And that isn't true. You know, as long as you have, you know, balanced diversity in the plants that you eat, you know, you can get all your nutrients from plants. And I'm saying that as a doctor, you know, I really am, that's really important.
Amir, we've only met in person today, or we've spoken previously, and one thing which is obvious is that you've got so much energy and positivity. You're doing lots of things in lots of different areas. You've just come back from South Africa, seeing some tremendous animals. Yeah. What is it that gives you this positivity, and where do we get it from?
You know what it is? I just feel really lucky, I think. You know, I grew up working class in Bradford, where I work. I work in the community that I grew up in, and I know how difficult that can be for people. And I'm really lucky that I managed to get a scholarship to a really good school, go off to university, and now I have this job which allows me to do things that I would never have been able to do as a youngster, or even dreamed of doing, really. So this energy, I guess, comes from the fact that I think I can't believe I'm here talking to you guys. I can't believe I get to do the TV stuff or the writing. All of that is just incredible to me. And every day I'm really thankful. And I just want to do more of it because it's just so, I just feel really blessed to be doing it.
And your work with the RSPB, Wildlife Trusts, you'll of course see what's happening in the natural world with bird flu, a really serious virus that has emerged from industrial poultry, got into the wild birds, and the wild birds are now being scapegoated and hugely impacted. What do you see as the way forward there? What's your take on that whole situation?
I think we've got to get the messaging out there to the general public. This isn't high up on the news agenda. You know, it's really hard to sell anything kind of environmental, green, unless there's a big controversy around it on the news agenda. And trust me, I try. You know, when I pitch to Good Morning Britain and Lorraine, you know, I try and get an environmental side of things. It just doesn't stick with the editors. And I think we've got to, you know, and it's really sad because this is our biggest and most challenging crisis that we're facing, and for some reason, whether it's agendaed or not, you know, they just don't want to cover it in the way that it should be covering. And I think voices like yours, Compassionate, the whole team, you know, are so important in getting those messages out, because the only news agenda that we can control is social media, and we've got to get more of that out there and encourage people who aren't engaged in the conversation to engage in it.
Well, one thing I'm really pleased about, Amir, is that we're connected and we're working together and we're getting those messages out through the social media and everywhere every way we can. Yep. So we'll keep doing that. Let's go to the floor for some questions. There is a roving mic, please. We'll go to the front here, please, first. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting. You talked about the effects of food on people. A lot of the things you talked about were correlations and not proofs. What I noticed is, of course, you said it's unethical to test on people, so we test on animals. The correlations are discovered by harming animals, and that's a conflict.
Yeah, and I said that because it's happening, and I wanted to present the evidence. Not that I agree with that. So you know, actually the outcomes of a lot of animal studies can't be applied to humans, and I would be very much against, in general, animal testing and animal studying. It's not ethical to test on animals. I don't agree with that, but I just wanted to put forward the studies that are out there and the difference between the two findings. So there have been studies done in animals on food and disease outcomes. That's not right, according to me, but I just wanted to tell you about the outcomes of it.
How else do we get
Well, it's not evidence when it can't always be applied to humans. So when it comes to medical testing, I understand why medicines have to be tested on animals, but the outcomes of them are not always applicable and to us as humans, and we often see that when it comes to phase 3 of trials of certain drugs. So I think with food, we know what is good for us, we know what works well, and that is plant-based. When it comes to farming, we know ethically what is right and what is wrong, and so we've got to move towards what we do know, and we, the effects of plants on us is so positive. The evidence for that is really overwhelming. When we've got all that positive evidence for plants, we don't necessarily need lots of negative evidence for meat.
Thank you. We're going to go up in the balcony and then we'll be coming over to the front, please.
Thank you very much. You've spoken to what I presume is probably a converted audience already here, and you've spoken about a very UK-based or centric view. From your introduction, the biggest problem, though, is that a lot of people in poorer countries are trying to catch up with our bad habits. And that's what really needs to change. That's where a lot of the intensive farming is going on. That's where a lot of the zoonotic diseases are coming from as well. And that's where there's going to be a lot more health issues. How do we get this message across to those countries that the direction they're going is going to lead to a whole lot of issues which we are facing here?
Yeah, and that's a really tricky one, because it almost feels quite hypocritical, doesn't it? Because we've been through what, a number of years ago, what they're going through now in terms of their food consumption. And for us to say, you shouldn't do that. We did it, but you shouldn't do it. It's a bit like when we're trying to conserve nature in, let's say, Africa. We've killed all our bears and all our wolves, but we want to save all their cheetahs and their elephants. And it's really hard, but I think it has to come from policy and politics for it to affect on a larger scale. Same as what we would do here, I guess, in the UK. Reward farmers for wildlife-friendly farming. Similar over there, but there has to be pressure from global organisations on governments to incentivise farmers and populations to work with nature to produce more compassionate food production.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple more short questions. One here first, please.
The food that's supplied to hospitals and schools is now in the hands of private companies. Do you think there should be more regulation so that there's more choice for school food and hospital food, and that there's some criteria that some of this bad food doesn't get to patients and school children?
Yeah, I do. So I've worked in hospitals. It was a number of years ago, but when I go to hospitals now for work-based purposes, I see some of the food that is being served there, and it's supposed to be nutritionally balanced, but it doesn't feel that way when you look at it. There's often white bread, tuna sandwiches, and really unbalanced meals. And so I do think it needs more regulation. I think that can be said across the NHS when it comes to anything private within the NHS. I think there's a lot to be said about the use of any private company within the NHS and what the agenda there is, because often the cheapest way forward is being used by private companies within the NHS. And I can talk at length about that, but that's not for today. But yes, I do think that there needs to be more nutritionally balanced and food within hospitals, because food is health, and if you want people to get better in hospital, you've got to give them the food that will actively heal them alongside the conventional medicine that they're taking.
Thank you. Sir David.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. There's an enormous puzzle in here. The facts are pretty clear, or as clear as facts ever are, that factory farming is bad for the animals, bad for us, bad for the planet. Yeah. Okay, I can see why the industry doesn't get that, because there's that little word called profit. Yeah. But why don't people more generally get it? Why doesn't the political system understand it? And what more can we, including Compassion in World Farming and others, do about it?
So I think why the people don't get it is there's been years and years of marketing of processed food, and the choices that people make when it comes to food are deeply psychological and go back to a lot of their childhood behaviour and what their parents did and their grandparents. There's so much. I did a show which this book is based on. It's called "You Are What You Eat," and we looked at the psychology of people's food choices, and it runs so deep. It isn't just about how much they can afford and what's on the supermarket shelves, but as well as that, you know, companies are paying huge amounts of money to market this food to us and get us coming back for more. So whether processed food is addictive or not, the jury's out on that. It's tricky that it doesn't necessarily fit the exact definition of addictive food, but it definitely gets you coming back for more with the salt and the sugar and the fat and the texture of it. And so it's really hard to put the onus on individuals to make those changes because we've been so influenced by huge corporations. Politics is slightly murkier, I think, because they're also influenced by finances and lobbying and companies that have their fingers in every pie and whose pockets run deep. But you know, I think that shouldn't stop us from getting the correct information out there, because there are, you know, people are wising up to these big companies and they're turning to people that they trust. And I think healthcare professionals in particular are people that are trusted, and we've got to do more to get that message out there. But we've also got to put pressure on politicians. And it goes back to what I said. You know, we are selfish as a species, and only if things affect us do we necessarily change things. And we've got to keep banging this drum about how bad it is for us for things to change.
Thank you so much, and we will have to stop it there because we know that you've got to shoot up to Harrogate for a very important ball, and very finely dressed you are.
I don't know if I look like this in 4 hours after driving.
Amir, I'd love to give you this gift, a
thank
memorial
of
giving our Peter Roberts Memorial Lecture. Please, Dr Amir Khan.
Thank you.